It was once an empire that spanned over half of the Mediterranean. Now it's a state that's looking to reassert itself into history. Today we're talking about Turkey. Geopolitics with Tiberius D is brought to you by our wonderful patron crew of Andrew Wagner, the West Dude, and Ladybug. We appreciate your sponsorship, and you are a credit to what we do. Thank you very much. All right, Justin. It's good to see ya. How are you? What's
Well,
new?
not seeing me. You're not
Yeah,
seeing me this week,
yeah. Not seeing us.
this episode. But maybe next time I'll come back. I might even wear the most professional thing I've ever worn in my life just for the next time I'm on video.
Well, that'd be nice. Be very nice.
But yeah, just been gaming, playing Minecraft. That's it, really.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting. I mean, we're closing out the week, but everyone will see this when it's uploaded on Monday. So we're
Yeah,
ending.
when this is uploaded.
Yeah, we're up when we're ending our week. Everyone else is starting theirs, right? So we're talking about Turkey as a given thing here. So what do you know about Turkey here, Justin? What do you have any idea where we're at, what we're talking about, or am I just taking you for
What
a
do I
ride?
know about Turkey?
Yeah.
I know that to a lot of people, it seems like the neo-Ottoman Empire is trying to reestablish establish itself if it's the neo-Ottoman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, as a culture, this was once one of the most powerful empires in the world, in history even, and now it's just this little state on its peninsula, and then on its other peninsula, split into this weird strait there, and it's trying to be the most powerful country in its region, which is a good segue into saying this is the first episode of Middle East Week. So we got Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, the three major players in the region. So we'll start with Turkey here.
Boys breaking out our schedule already. Yes. Okay. So, I believe the first question's the history. So if we want to tag that, we can. If
Yep.
okay, sure.
How did Turkey enter the modern era,
All right.
Tiberius?
Thank you for answering I'm sorry, not answering. Thank you for asking the question. All right. So, how the Turks get into the modern era is a little weird because it's not a lot. I'm sorry, it's a lot like what we see in certain European states, but then completely different others. Let's rewind the clock to the early 1000 AD. We're looking at basically the fallout of the Islamic expansion out of what we would call Saudi Arabia. This is, the first caliphates, that kind of thing. Build out, build out, build out. And what they do is they displace a group of people that are actually on the other side of the Caspian Sea in what we would think of as, this is around Samarkand in Uzbekistan. This is where the people that we think of as the Turks come from. And actually, if you look throughout the region in Central Asia, there's many, many groups that are considered themselves Turks or Turkic. This is the Uyghurs all the way off in Uyghurstan in China, all the way out to who we think of as the Turks in Turkey. So what happens is that when the Islamic Revolution happens, wrong term. When the birth of Islam happens, is that it displaces a crap ton of people as its religion comes out. Now, largely it's used as a hack and slash, conquer as you go kind of thing. It's either you force people to convert, and a lot of people do, but some people don't, and some people will move. While the Turks will largely become Islamic, they will move because of population changes and how everything works. And you get a certain group of people that will be the protagonists of the story that will leave this region, pick up, and they'll actually go to the other side of the Caspian Sea, and they'll go into an area that we now call Asia Minor, or at least that's what the Romans called it. This is what we know as basically today is the Turkish Peninsula. And they show up here. At the time, they are part of the Islamic conquest of what is the Eastern Roman Empire, which is at this time known as the Byzantine Empire in history. They think of themselves as Romans. They are Greeks, but they're literally the remnant of the Roman Empire still. And this is going on literally, in the 1000s or 1000s. Is that a word? um, anyway, so these Turkish people show up, and they're part of they're part of this wave of Islamic um, invasion, but also like resettlement, and they will settle out here. The long and the short here is that they come in and they try to set up shop, and there's a few different like disparate kingdoms that will form out whenever they start getting control and the Byzantines start losing control. Is that you get a few sultanates and emirs here, and then one of them that really takes off is called the Sultan of Rum. Where do you think they get the name Rum from? They consider themselves the Islamic follow-through of Rome. That didn't quite work out between the Crusader states coming in, or the Crusades coming in and trying to wipe out everybody, and through different dynastic struggles between their neighbors, Rome will get eventually absorbed. But we're going to talk about a particular group of people that will come to dominate the region, even though they're all really of a more similar ethnic and cultural tie, and that is the Ottomans. Now, the Ottomans originally started out around on the eastern Aegean, around the Bosphorus, which is the the area that goes between the Aegean Sea and the Black Sea, and they'll build up on the eastern side of the Bosphorus. Basically, just cattywampus right from Constantinople at the time, and they'll start to build out as a country. They'll basically take advantage of the decline of the Byzantines, particularly in when the Fourth Crusade comes in, because the Fourth Crusade was supposed to go through the Holy Land. Well, they picked a fight with the Orthodox Church instead, and they basically run in and sack Constantinople. And from that part, you have like the Latin Empire. It's called the Latin Empire, but it's basically a small city-state where the Crusaders take over for a minute, and then Byzantium will come back and get it. But it's pretty much the death knell for the Byzantine Empire. They'll be around for about 100 more years, but a group of people called the Ottomans will largely build out around them. They literally will encircle Constantinople. And they will take more possessions in Asia Minor as time goes on, and they'll also cross the Bosphorus, and they'll take a lot in what we call Bulgaria now. Bit of Greece, but of Bulgaria, and the Turkish side of the Bosphorus as well. And so they start building out, and I can get into like all these different things with names I can't pronounce, but the fast track history is this. Eventually the Ottomans will be able to finally and completely eradicate the Byzantines from existence. They'll come into Constantinople, they'll sack it with massive cannons, and finally break the city walls, the formerly invincible city walls of Constantinople, and they'll eventually they will rename it Istanbul. Believe it or not, bit of a trick history. A lot of people thought when it was conquered it was named that. No, they actually kept Constantinople. It wasn't until the Young Turks Revolution back in the early 1900s that it actually is renamed Istanbul. But that's a thing for a whole nother day. So, where are we at here? Once Byzantium is largely gone, the Byzantine Empire, Byzantium is largely gone, and Constantinople is the capital of the Ottoman Empire. They're able to expand unopposed, and they'll largely not run into anybody for a quick minute. They'll go into the Levant, and that is largely left over. It was largely sacked from people like Tamerlane, who basically the Ottomans had largely fought, and actually Tamerlane beat the Ottomans, I think, in 2 battles, at least one, but it might have been even 2. But he wasn't able to kind of like deliver the final coup de grace. And if I remember right, he dies, or he ends up having to go to India. Can't remember exactly. But anyway, the long and the short here is that the Ottomans can go in almost every direction. They can go east and south into the Levant because there's no major power to oppose them at this point, except for maybe the Mamluks. They can go into Europe because basically Europe is squabbling over the remnants of, I'm not going to say the Holy Roman Empire, a bit of Byzantium, but moreover, the religious and ethnic makeup of Eastern Europe is changing at this point. You have the advancement of Christendom into Eastern Europe. This is the Teutonic Order moving into Poland. We'll talk about them later. You have the Avars getting absolutely annihilated by people called the Magyars, which are the Hungarians, and they'll come in and they will displace the Avars and become Hungarians. You will have the Christianization of them following later, and you will also have, at least in the Balkans, people trying to put together a semi-permeable state that will actually hold well. This actually gets into the Vlad Dracula conversation about this time, believe it or not. This is right before Bulgaria bites the dust from the Ottomans, because for a while the Bulgarians are a functioning kingdom. They've kind of put themselves back into together into a functional state, but it's held together with an iron fist. And this is actually where Vlad Dracula comes from. Where this completely goes to crap is that the Turks will eventually be strong enough they'll take them out, which is actually during and before Constantinople was taken. Let's fast forward here, because I can go to 1,000 different places with this, and I can hang up on history for literally an hour, and let's just not turn this entire episode into a history episode. So, the Ottomans expand, and they will expand and expand and expand. They will get all the way down to Mecca, Medina, and what we now call Saudi Arabia. They will dominate all the Persian Gulf. They will go into Mesopotamia. They'll take over most of Iraq. They'll take over Egypt. They will take over most of the southern African, or most of the North Africa coast, on the Mediterranean Sea. And here's the big one. Here's the big wars. So they get into fights into what we call Serbia today, and they basically conquer it. The Hungarians will largely try to defend it. They will fail. And then Hungary actually gets on the chopping block, and they will lose more often than not, if not completely. In one particular battle, and I've referenced this in a previous episode, is that the Hungarian king, who is also the king of Bohemia, dies in battle against the Ottomans. And this is early 1500s, like 1527, 23, something like that. He only has one inheritor that it can go to, and it's not a kid. It's like a side bloodline. It is the Archduke of Austria. So, while the Ottomans are coming in and it'll actually take about half of the Kingdom of Hungary, the other half, and Bohemia, is formally incorporated into the Archduchy of Austria. And when that happens, you now have Super Austria. This is how the Habsburgs will pretty much maintain their emperorship of not only Austria, but the Holy Roman Empire, and become the major working force, basically, in Germany. From this point on, I can hear you clicking, by the way.
Sorry.
No problem. From this point on, it is basically an integrated conflict between the Turks, the Austrians, and then a little bit later on, the Turks will have to contend with the Poles and the Russians. A lot of history. I'm going to condense this down, and parts of it I don't know. I don't know exactly where the Ottomans and the Poles really start getting into it, but basically it'll be the formation of the. Some people call it Jagiellon, but it's the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. When that's formed, you have a very large state in Central Europe that actually will border the northern provinces of the Ottoman Empire, which is basically Romania. The Poles will fight them off to try to get down to the choke point in Romania, and there will be a series of battles and wars over that. Another group of people show up, particularly during sorry, excuse me, I don't want to get my history wrong here. I was thinking Peter the Great, but it might be a little late. The Russians build out. We talked about this in the Russia episode. Around 1600, eventually, or largely, the Russian Empire will start making full physical contact with the Ottoman Empire. And they will basically more or less vie for dominance over the Black Sea. It's amazing how well the Russians do, considering they have to deal with the Swedes and the Poles and the Turks and anybody else that they deal with on the side. Russia being Russia, they can just basically ground pound everybody by sheer attrition. And that's most of their history, and that's what they'll kind of do to the Ottomans, but the Ottomans and the Janissaries will give the Russians a really good fight. The Ottomans will win, if I remember right, the first two general engagements, confrontations, but the Turks and the Ottomans and the Russians more or less will eventually fight 11 wars, and the Russians will win most of them, if not all, or not all of them. They'll win most of them, particularly the latter half. And basically, the history of the Ottomans from this point on is engaging with the primary European powers, and there will eventually be political times where they can get in and out, and they can engage very, very well. But between the number of enemies, the ability in which they actually pull together to unite against the Ottomans, and a third effect, which we'll talk about here in a second, the Ottomans will eventually start losing. And to give you an idea, though, the Ottomans, centered around Istanbul in Turkey, would go all the way to Vienna in Austria, the capital of the Archduchy and the Holy Roman Empire at that point. And they'll get there, and there's the Great Siege of Vienna, and they almost take it. Almost take it twice, actually, but they fail. They horribly fail the first time. The second time, they get pretty close, but basically the entire Holy Roman Empire, and if I remember right, the Poles end up showing up. And
the Hussars.
Yes, actually. So, that'll happen. And from that point, that's the moment that they kind of go in reverse. Now, let's talk about that third thing, because this is not talked about at all, really, in history. In Spain, Portugal, and later England, they, during the late 1400s, and particularly the early 1500s, are working on something called deepwater navigation. They are studying how to navigate miles and miles and miles away from shore where you can't see it, and you're just shooting. At first, it's called dead reckoning, but it'll eventually get into like stellar navigation, and then you'll actually have compasses and all this other stuff. Why does this matter? Because Spain and England don't get into a confrontation with the Ottomans until very, very much later. Spain, Portugal, and then eventually England are looking for they call it, okay, there's two different terms for this. They call it the long way round or the Western Passage. And what the whole idea here was is that either, particularly what Portugal did, is they wanted to go all the way around Africa and get a trade route to India. And they wanted to try to course, and they wanted to help build out an entire trade fleet to basically get to the other end of the Silk Road, and you could basically load up everything in a boat from India and go the long way around, and you don't have to deal with the Ottomans. And this is making the Ottomans a crap ton of money. They are the end part of the Silk Road, although that really actually, they're not the end part. They're more of the intermediary. Like, officially, they're the end of the Silk Road in history, but that goes all the way into Europe. All the spices and all the silk and whatnot goes through the Ottoman Empire, and it goes into Europe, and then vice versa. It makes the Ottomans filthy, stupid rich. The Sea of Marmara, which is the place between Asia Minor and Greece, from this point from this point and before that, largely since the Bronze Age in Greece, there's a lot of arguments to be said that this is the most valuable and prosperous area on the planet. It has that, in modern numbers, in modern GDP numbers, it would have the highest GDP per capita in the world, because you can ship things from A to B very, very easily. And there's a really good map you can pull up, which is actually from Rome to War. It's a video game, but it'll give you a really good idea, is that it's basically a harbor within a harbor. Is that if you're in Athens, you can get on a boat and you can go to Troy or to Istanbul or Constantinople or up into Pella in Macedonia. This entire region is literally a day's sail within any other part in it, and it turns into this giant trade network. And between building up on top of that and building out as the world's primary, intermediary for trade, being in the Silk Road, the Ottomans are filthy, stupid rich. It's actually the same thing that empowered the Eastern Roman Empire, but the Ottomans do it even better. And remember that this ebbs and flows. There's certain times where like China's going down the crapper, and so they can't export very well. There's certain times when there's like a climatological disaster. Long story short, a lot of money makes the Ottomans rich. The thing that changes here is that eventually the Europeans do find a way around. And, this is whole with Christopher Columbus, believe it or not, is he was trying to find the Western approach, where they knew the world was actually a ball at that point. And they did the backhand math, and they're like, oh, yeah, I can sell to India from here. I'm just going to go west. Technically, he was right. He just he thought it was going to be a 3,000-mile trip, which 3,000 miles around, he did land into something. But it wasn't the East Indies, which is why these have their names, or where eventually they'll be called the West Indies. Because of this, because they thought it was India, or, at least sorry. You get where I'm going with this. I'm a little spastic today. I apologize for everyone on the chat. But they'll land, and they did their math a little wrong. They thought it was going to be a 3,000-mile trip around the globe. Turns out they were off by another 7,000. And so they had the right idea. Go the long way around. They just didn't realize there was a whole other 2 continents in the way. And so this is actually unironically how the Spanish get involved in America. They're looking for India, and they try to go the long way around, thinking it's not the long way around, and turned out to be wrong. But worked out for them to some degree. So the Portuguese and eventually the English will go the other way. They'll go around the Cape of Good Hope, and they will eventually start building out what eventually for the British will be the East India Trade Company. All of this process will slowly eat away at the Ottomans' financial security, particularly from the revenue and trade. And this is largely where, and part of why once the decline happens from the Siege of Vienna, it never stops, is that the Europeans will undermine them with long-distance trade from India, and basically everyone will conspire against them because of commonality, whether it be their Christian faith or just geopolitical interest. The Ottomans are kind of the boogeyman of Europe at this point, and everyone's got an axe to grind with them. So anytime that you can just rile up the rabble-rousers to go, we openly hate these people, we're going to go smack them, tends to be what happens. Let's fast forward to the 1800s, because basically that's all decline from there on out, more or less. 1800s is where the Ottomans really start having a problem. Now, they're able to largely, even with defeats, hold on to most of their territory. The Russians will take something here or there. Austria is able to kind of just build out like a buffer zone with Serbia and a few areas where they just kind of agree this is the border. That's basically the Austrians will hold what we now call as Croatia. The Turks will hold Bosnia. And there's given borders here, and then of course the Poles are eventually eaten by the Germans, particularly Prussia and Russia. So we're in the early 1800s now. What's going on? This is the era known as the sick man of Europe, which is basically the Ottomans being on their last leg. The Ottomans are weird because back at the beginning of the Ottoman Empire, the Islamic world is the most technologically advanced part on the planet, except maybe a little bit later Ming China shows up. But where the Islamic world is very, very open and very, very intellectual during this, basically the Islamic Middle Era is what it's called. But we now we think of this as like the rise of the Ottoman Empire, is that Islam will become a lot more orthodoxic. They embrace orthodoxy a lot more. And it comes back to bite them to a large degree. And that is not just the Ottomans. This is literally throughout the Islamic world, although the Ottomans control quite a bit of it. And so they'll largely fall into this trap where my camera settings want to screw up. Yeah, for some reason, it says I haven't changed anything, but it's looking different. Okay.
It just got way brighter. I don't know.
Yeah, it did. I like none of the settings changed. Anyway, getting back to where we were, is that the Ottomans are on the decline, and come 1800, or I'm sorry, not 1800, but basically the post-Napoleonic Wars, the Ottomans don't have the technological suite. Their population is not keeping pace with everybody else's because they're having basically the start of the Industrial Revolution, which has allowed them to produce more goods and services ever increasing. And the tolerance, if you will, of the Ottoman Empire starts to bite them in the butt, because largely what they would do is they would bring in anyone who was, ethnically different or religiously different, and they say, hey, look, we can do that. Come on in. You just have to pay homage to the Sultan, and you might have to pay a little bit more in taxes. But generally tried to treat people pretty good. And it was, I'm not going to say it was like multicultural or like multi-religious, but it was not, come in and kill everybody kind of thing. It was semi-benevolent, I guess. Anyway, what happens is that this kind of starts biting them in the ass, because all these ethnic peoples start going, hey, this is also the rise of nationalism. This is the era that this really starts taking off, is that you have Serbians who go, I don't want to be ruled by the Ottomans. I want to be ruled by Serbia, which technically is a small client state. And then you have Bosnians feeling the same way, and Bulgarians, and Romanians, and all these other folks that are ruled within the Ottoman Empire. In the same way that this will fracture the Austrian Empire and will bring the birth of Germany, is that this also really starts harming the Ottomans, because the traditional is that basically it was far more feudal. You appease the lords, you appease the population, everyone just kind of tags along. Not so much the case anymore. People want self-determination within the confines of their ethno-nationalistic identity. And this starts really tearing apart their system. So that's part one. Part two was that we talked about technology. So they just couldn't keep up because they didn't have an open society built on scholarship to the degree that they had when the empire was forming, while Europe was making the opposite transition. Europe was becoming part of the Enlightenment. People were embracing science and embracing individualism and liberalism in ways that would eventually bring what we call like the modern world. And three, the political factions within the empire started to get a little weird. It's one thing to have things in a particular manner, but even in the empire itself, liberalism started to take off, and there was calls to have, a parliament. There was calls to eventually dissolve the monarchy and whatever, but largely that would be tabled until the rise of Turkey and Ataturk and whatnot. But I'm trying to paint a picture is that literally the Ottomans kind of die in the same way that major empires tend to, is that it's not one thing, it's a death of a thousand cuts. Is that one crisis leads into another or supercharges the next crisis, which leads to compounding crises that eventually just leaves the Ottomans in decline. And you'll watch between 1800 and 1900, the Ottomans will lose half of their territory. It's that bad. Within 100 years, they will lose half of everything that they owned. That's, obviously whether that's good or bad is up to your own personal politics, but for the Turks, for the Ottoman Empire, it's a disaster. They no longer have a sizable population base. The economy is going to crap. They have real problems here. And they're basically, when it finally gets to World War I, they are playing second fiddle to the Germans. And while they're a functional ally and they have common interests, a good alliance this doesn't make. Before we get to even World War I, the Balkan Wars happens. And just to kind of give you an idea here, what happens is that over the span of about 40 years, you'll have the Turkish borders largely in Europe be the same as it had been for about 100. And then it will suddenly start breaking apart because of these national states. Serbia will go from a little pocket buffer state to being quite sizable. They'll literally just eat entire portions of the declining Ottoman Empire. Although most of it is all Serbian. You'll have the rise of Albania? Yeah, Albania will show up, what eventually will be Romania from Wallachia and Moldavia will pop off, and they'll eventually be formed together into Romania. You'll eventually get Bulgaria to pop out of here. The long and the short is that eventually the compounding problems for the Ottomans got so bad that they even lost control of most of their client areas. And then to make it worse, all of those folks in the First Balkan War will literally gang up on the Ottomans to seal them in. And by what is it, like 1910, you'll have you'll have the Balkan Wars have made it to where, and I might have my years a little mixed up, and I apologize. It's just a lot of these things happen like in consequence. So like if I remember right, it is literally like Serbian, Bulgarian independence. The Balkan Wars pretty much happened immediately, and then it's the preamble right up into World War One, and it's part of. Literally, this is what kicks off World War One. This is Serbia assassinating Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria because they don't like the Austrians. I don't want to get into the Black Hand kind of thing, but very recently, Bosnia, which had been formerly part of the Turkish Empire, had just been annexed by the Austrian Empire. And so hands are exchanged, people get freedom, people lose freedom, makes a lot of people upset, blows up into wars, and it's constant. It literally is all the way up until after World War One that this entire area is fighting. And we're still seeing a lot of that today. I'm not going to talk about particularly that. But let me rapid fire this off for you. Greece will get like a level of autonomy and eventually like a guarantee from the British, and they'll pop out in the early 1800s. You'll have Serbia pop out in the early 1800s, but these are relatively small states. However, Serbia will double, if not triple in size. Greece will triple, if not quadruple in size. You'll have the rise of Montenegro, Albania, Romania, and Bulgaria in rapid order, and this is only over the span of like 10 to 20 years. And there's a shitload of fighting that happens, pardon my language, where people get in, just basically get in, they're like, no, this is where the border is. No, this is where the border is. The Turks completely lose control. And by the time we get to World War One, they've lost all but what we think of as the European part of Turkey today. That's largely all they have left, give or take. There's a little bit more there. In the eastern part of the provinces, it's not that much better. You have the same kind of like nationalistic fervor kick up for the people that we call the Arabs. And they don't want to be ruled by the Ottomans either. They'll eventually make a lot of deals with the British and the French, and this is all T.E. Lawrence, that kind of thing, during World War One, where they should get their own independence. Most of them don't. Don't trust the British. And Turkey falls into the era of crisis. This is going into 1920 and 1921. Turkey basically blows into civil war. The radicals, which are known as the Young Turks, are not happy with the peace deal that's signed, and they basically just say, screw that, and pull a coup and openly try to turn it into an authoritarian military junta. They succeed to a degree, but they'll eventually get a moderate team, which is one of the few times that moderates ever come up in history and actually are politically relevant. You'll have a few moderates who are generals from World War One kind of come together, and they'll oppose the Young Turks, and they will eventually form out into the modern government of Turkey today. This is Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. Ataturk being the father of the Turks. Basically makes modern Turkey. There's a lot of details I can go down here, and part of it I know, part of it I don't, but long story short, civil war eventually breaks out. The moderates win, and then there's a conversation about should they honor the treaties with the Brits and the Turks, or I'm sorry, the Brits, the Greeks, and the French, because the Turks were actually supposed to lose quite a bit more than they did. basically all the Turks get together and say, no, we're not doing this. And so they fight to maintain what they saw was equitable borders, and that's really where we get to the Turkish borders of today. At this point, in some kind of way, Turkey literally just walks away from taking part in history. They'll be involved in a number of effects, whether it's the Cuban Missile Crisis because they're actually harboring U.S. nuclear missiles, but they actively won't really make any kind of major moves in the region on their own merits until today. And so this is basically Turkish history in a nutshell, and I can expand a lot of this when we eventually get down to season 3. That'll be the whole episode. I promise we'll get there, but a lot of Turkish history, a lot I have to skim over, and I know it sounds like I'm incoherently rambling. I've gotten a little bit of feedback from folks about like condensing history and then expanding upon it in weird sections. I do know what I'm talking about, I promise. But anyway, yeah, if it doesn't sound entirely right, it's largely out of the fact that I'm trying to pick where to outline, where to underline, and what just to table until a different episode. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. All right, so
Yeah.
that is 36 minutes is where we're at. So Justin, if you have any questions, though, feel free to peg at me for a minute.
Yeah, I'll just note, I know quite a bit about Ottoman history, and there is so much. You know, when you're talking about one of the biggest empires of its time, you got to skim over a lot to get this within an hour. Especially since this is only 1/3 of what we're talking about. It's very hard to do in such a short amount of time. So it's commendable that you even get as much as you get in there. As far as Ottoman history or Turkish history, I mean, you really covered everything that needs to be covered to get them to where they are today. I guess the one thing I would ask is there any like spirit of these? Was it the spirit of these moderates who took over in Turkey to keep this state in the quiet, condensed sense that it was, where it just didn't play a role for a long time? Was that their intention when they won the Civil War?
There's a level here where I don't want to speak out of ignorance, because there's part of this I know and there's part of this I don't. Because I kind of, the Turkish politics and Turkish history, for me, I'm not super versed on after the collapse of the Ottomans, because they kind of don't matter. Or at least they didn't make themselves matter. Here's what I do think I understand, at least that I've kind of picked up on. Ataturk largely looked at what Turkey was after the Civil War, and he thought it was a wreck. Probably a pretty good assessment. You know, it literally was an empire that had been in decline for over 200, 300 years, and it had gone through a civil war and basically a Unitarian schism to keep the evil foreigners out. And while it succeeded in doing all of this, it was in shambles to a large degree. We can talk about how technologically it was a little bit backwards. It really was playing second fiddle industrially to the Central Powers. We can talk about how the society had transformed immensely from being, at least when the empire formed, being a lot more open to not being. And actually, one of the big things that Ataturk will do to try to change this is that he will openly have a moderate secular government. That's a big deal. It's the real first secular government we see in the Islamic world. Makes the point. It's like, look, religion, yeah, we have our faith, but we need to stop making it the end-all be-all. This is the problem with the Young Turks, which he was right. Like, the Young Turks were not only nationalist fanatics, they were religious fanatics. And, yes, just as a general answer to your question, I think it is entirely within the purview that they didn't want the Turks being involved in stuff. There is a big conversation because Ataturk is in control when World War II kicks off. He didn't want any part of it. There was a problem because the Germans had a lot of interest in Turkey. The Turks and the Soviets didn't like each other ever, largely because they're just the Russians. And the Turks and the Russians never got along. Germany really wanted access to Turkey because of Turkish chromium. That was a really big deal during the war. The Turks eventually make a trade deal with the Germans to get it, And they'll largely get it from 1941 to 1944. Turkey will be the main supplier to the European axis of chromium. However, eventually the Soviets start building out in the Black Sea, and as they start winning, they get more control of it. They push most of the Axis out. Eventually, the Soviets are just like, hey, we're winning, and we can shoot your ships. So you can stop trading chromium now. And more or less, the Turks are largely forced to concede on that. It's okay at that point. There's no way that the Axis were ever going to win. So the Turks just basically said, all right, well, we're done making money, and they moved out. However, most of the history after this is largely kind of reactionary. Is that you'll see a lot of pressure because the Soviet Union and Turkey literally share a border. And so the Turks are very, very concerned about dealing with the Russians. Weird part is that figuratively, while Turkey has largely left history, they will be one of the first signatories into a new military alliance among the Western nations, and we call this Nato. Turkey's one of the first people to get in on it. Probably a pretty good idea, because being involved with an alliance with West Germany and the United States to oppose the Soviets probably kept them from being a battlefield in the Cold War writ large. They openly just picked a side and they said, we're siding with somebody. Might have been the right call. Probably was the right call. And so, at least for me, they only made deals where they had to, and it's not literally until Aragon, depending on however you want to pronounce his name. I apologize. Erdogan, I believe, is actually the technical pronunciation of it. But anyway, the ruler that they have currently right now, he's the first one to actively use Turkish military, political, and economic power in a concise way around the region and with their neighbors. Turkey just doesn't really do anything. I'm sure somebody's going to peg me for this one. I'm sorry, I'm ignoring Cyprus. Yes, it's a deal. It's largely put down because NATO says no. And that's largely because Greece and Turkey don't agree, but they're both NATO members.
Alrighty. So with that, I think it's time to ask, what is the geography that empowers Turkey?
Ew. It doesn't really empower. So...
Womp womp.
Yeah, unironically. Turkey has the worst part of the geography in the Mediterranean. Let's talk about this. Asia Minor is basically a plateau that's literally jutted out of the Mediterranean Ocean. And so it's basically, you got a nice shore, a bit of a place you can hang out in, and then literally it's 1,000 feet up. If you're on the shore, and this is where the Greek colonies used to be in Turkey, it's incredibly beneficial. Gets a nice amount of rain, good weather, good climate, Mediterranean paradise, right? But if you get into Anatolia proper, it's a nightmare. It's a disaster. This is the place where you have to worry about where your water's coming from because it's literally it's pretty much a desert. It's not like a full-blown arid desert, but it's a semi-arid desert. It gets rained every now and again, but it looks very akin to northern New Mexico and Arizona. A lot of their location is just generally good. It's the geography around the location is bad. It's almost like Turkey has the inside-out borders. Is that the places where its borders are the places that you usually want to build out a modern infrastructure surrounded by good borders. And they're, unironically, the inside of Turkey, particularly Asia Minor, is border material kind of geography, where the outside where you can actually build stuff is there. And there is the places where you want to build. And so it's literally the periphery that the Turks build out on. And so they're literally in everyone's face in the region and how to deal with them, particularly the Greeks. That doesn't bode well for relations. That doesn't bode well for anything. And that's why literally when the Ottoman Empire was becoming a thing, they eventually conquered everyone around them in short order, because it's not... The core is not the functional core. The core of Turkey is a place no one wants to live. But the periphery is pretty nice. Istanbul is in a really good spot. Sardis isn't a really good spot. These places are good, they work, but no borders. Literally in front of everybody. It's either you're on the ocean or you're literally a hop, step, and a jump from Bulgaria, Greece, or Syria. Oops. So, long story short, Sea of Marmara helps a lot. Climate's pretty good, but the geography really doesn't empower Turkey. It really hurts. Now, how do you rewind the clock 500 years before the decline of deep sea navigation? Absolutely super empowering, because it was the end of the Silk Road, and the Sea of Marmara had a lot more value in being a trade nexus. Doesn't have that anymore. And so, yeah, bad. Follow-ups.
Yeah, so one of the main concerns that I've heard you speak about with Turkey's geography is the fact that the hilliness and the height of that internal area of Asia Minor is a terrible thing for infrastructure in particular.
Mm-hmm.
How much does that cripple Turkey as a state?
It does and it doesn't. It's a little bit of the Japan effect, actually, because the Turks don't have to operate there. And the only big city they have in the whole Turkish core, quote unquote, is Ankara. It's not that big, and it's literally just like a mock capital. And everyone kind of decided about back in the '90s that it was really dumb to even operate out of there, and pretty much everyone went back to operating out of Istanbul. Officially, there's still buildings in Ankara that's for the government, and they can meet there, and the presidential palace is there, but no one really cares. There's, if I remember correctly, Erdogan spends way more time in Istanbul than he does in Ankara. So, let's table that part. It's similar to Japan, where you have like a spot here and a spot here and a spot here that works really well, but you can't connect them over land. You can put a boat, or you can put everything on a boat and just sail from place to place to place. That's actually a part that really helps the Turks, and that's why the Turks have had a decently strong navy in the past. It's why they kind of do now. It's why they usually have a really good army and capable military throughout most of their history, is that they have to be martial, and they have to be be able to deal with connections. And so it's one of those, like, should be break the rule in every single way, but in the ways that it breaks the rule, it actually enables it. Is that it's in such a particularly interesting spot where, as far as infrastructure in the interior core, they can make a little bit of it here and there. They don't need to. No one lives there. It's all on the outside, and that's just all empowered by being able to literally just reach out and touch water. It's pretty good for them.
Now, this is kind of a disconnect from Turkey, but it is in the same region.
Sure.
How does the Suez Canal affect Turkey? Because the only way to get out of Turkey by boat would be to go through the Strait of Gibraltar. Does the Suez Canal assist Turkey from this problem?
It doesn't. Okay, it's not really a problem. The Turks really don't give a flying crap about getting out to the wider world into a large degree. Remember, this is actually kind of what killed them as a functional empire, is that deep sea navigation allowed basically a fast track route by water from India all the way up into Western Europe. Without that, the Silk Road and the Central Asian trade largely just died or shut down to a large degree. There's some remnants left over, whether we talk about oil pipelines or what have you. But as far as the general level, everything that the Turks want is not out and abroad, it's very nearby. They need oil? Cool. They literally just go over to Azerbaijan and get more. Oh, they want oil? Cool. They go over to North Kurdistan in Iraq and get a little more. They need food? Cool. They literally just go right up next door and they go into Bulgaria and they just take all the Bulgarian grain. If they really want to get nasty, they can go up to Ukraine, but the Russians are going to have a word about that. Everything that the Turks want in a geopolitical sense is literally in Turkey or next door. And so the Turks really don't worry about operating in the larger world. So, how does Suez hurt or help? It really doesn't matter at this point. It's super. I mean, it allows for basically what is the new Silk Road, which is everything from Rotterdam all the way over to Singapore. Basically, that naval shipping route.
Mhm.
It empowers that, but the Turks really don't care because if they can't functionally be the intermediary, and that only is over land, they don't really get to touch it or be involved with it, and there's no way they can shut it down because the worst case is they go around the Cape of Good Hope, and yeah, sure, it's 10,000 miles around the continent of Africa, but I mean, they did that with sailing ships. They're not going to have problems doing this with diesel freighters. Um, the whole question is actually what does the Turks look more like in the future with a world that's a lot more neo-imperial, which we can definitely talk about in the next section. Oh, we're at 50
Yeah,
minutes. Holy crap.
I think we got to move there now.
Fair enough.
So, what is the future of Turkey? What are we gonna see in the coming years?
So if me and my colleagues in the field are right, and yeah, I'm agreeing with people like Zion on this one, is that if the world is neo-imperial, Turkey looks poised to dominate the region. While you can make an argument that they don't hold a candle economically to like a major European state like Germany, which is true. They're, I think, 8th in the world right now, maybe even less. I'd have to double check. They're kind of economic underperformers in the general sense, and that a lot of that's geographically based. They have everything they need, or everything's really, really close, and no one who is really, really close holds a candle. The only people that can legitimately oppose Turkish interest in a knockdown drag-out fight right now is the Russians. And you may have noticed the Russians are still in decline themselves. So where the Turks are pretty much stagnating in terms of general power and quality, everyone else is either in decline or has openly failed as a state. Hi, Syria. So the long and the short is basically all the Turks need to do to dominate the region is either sit and wait or just play a little bit of poker and win 9 times out of 10. It's a real good time to be a Turk right now if you're walking into the world that we're going to. Now, that being said, they're probably going to transition into a far more authoritarian state. That sucks. And so there's a real question that people have asked me quite a bit, so I'm going to answer it here. Is there a direct confrontation between Turkey and Iran? Not really. They openly agree on pretty much everything that matters. One, they like where the border is. No one really wants to screw with it because they'd actually have to get in each other's face, and it's actually a really good place for a border. It's very mountainous, it's very hilly, and it's full of people that they hate anyway, so every now and again they just roll a couple tanks in and bomb the living piss out of everybody. So, yeah, as a general level here, it's just like we hate the Kurds. The Azerbaijani are, will tolerate or will deal with as need be. Everything else is just immaterial. No one cares. The Turks are looking south, north, and east. I'm sorry, south, north, and west. The Persians are largely looking to their west and to their south. But where all the borderlands lie where they could really interact with each other, such as Kurdistan, which pretty much it's all Kurdistan. The Persians and the Turks agree. Kurdistan sucks and they deserve to die. So, yeah, there's that. It's general in the future though. I don't know what the Turks are going to do exactly because they've got a lot of options and they're going to have to pick and choose their fights, their battles, and how they do it. They quit too early, they could actually provoke a very major response from the Russians. So far, it's working out for them. They just had the Azerbaijani Armenian last flare up, which was, basically a 1-day war. The Turks and the Azerbaijani won that fight. It was over in a day, and a lot of it was because of new drone technology and whatever. The Russians, which were supporting the Armenians, largely backed out. They really can't afford a knockdown, drag-out fight with anybody right now, if ever again. And so the Russians basically just scooped. If that's the continuation of that relationship, that means that the Turks will largely just come to dominate the region over the next 20 years unopposed. If the Turks get pissed, or I'm sorry, excuse me, if the Germans get pissed, what is wrong with me? If the Russians, the Ruskies, if they get pissed enough where they actually want to challenge Turkey in a more knockdown, drag-out fight, that's a different conversation. But the Russians don't really care that much because they already have the southern borders that they need. They're only contending for southern borders that they want. Versus in Eastern Europe, that's a different story. They don't have anything what they want or need. And that's their primary focus. They're far more... the Russians now are basically saving up all their ships for the Poles and the Germans if they have to deal with them. So far, that's a whole other conversation. I'll table that. So, who does Turkey have to deal with? Number one is Greece. Greece is their sworn enemy. They hate each other. They only get along because they're both in Nato together, and no one's really arbitrating that fight. Expect within the next couple years that the Turks go into Cyprus and conquer it outright. And if the Greeks have anything to say about it, they might just go and start steamroll Greece in the same breath. That's totally within their possibility. And just reminder, Greece has been in a recession since 2008, and it doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon. They can deal with Bulgaria in decline, which doesn't really put a threat to them, so they can kind of like sphere of influence them. They already are in a good relationship with the Azerbaijanis, so that makes them really good on oil. The key people to talk to right now to see where this is going to go is dealing with the Israelis. If they can make some kind of arrangement, that pretty much means stability in this region for however long that arrangement lasts. The question is, to finish this out, is what will the Islamic community in Turkey do? Because one thing that Erdogan is showing signs of is that he's walking away from secularization and more towards a more religiously fueled country, which is why a lot of us are monitoring Turkey now as the neo-Ottoman Empire. If Turkey walks away from secularization, I'm not going to say it's going to be the end of Turkey or anything like that, but it's going to present a lot of problems. Because religion can give you a really good, national spirit, if you will, but it's really, really bad about being pragmatic when you most need it. We all know what religious zealots look like. We've seen them for the last 20 years in abundance. Turkey being full of religious zealots doesn't exactly mean they're going to make the right moves and the right calls when they need to. And in a not a knockdown, drag-out fight, but in a world where for some reason Turkey and Israel are not getting along, let alone that they decide to be antagonistic to each other, I don't want to see that mess. But it's very, very possible. And so I'm not sure what's going to happen in that regard, because this is more of an identity question, and they have to answer it themselves, but I'll put it this way. If Turkey and Israel get along, Turkey will basically handle everyone in the general region, and Turkey will be one of the first new empires out the gate. If Turkey and Israel don't get along, Turkey will put a sphere of influence into southern Europe, particularly southeastern Europe, and then they'll contend with the Israeli-Saudi alliance. They may tag team up with the Persians, I don't know, but it's going to be an interesting ride if that happens. All right, we've got about 1 minute left. You got anything?
Yeah, I think that's about it. I mean, the one question would be, how does NATO affect Turkey in this regard? Because there's kind of questions of can Turkey be kicked out of NATO if they do something with Greece?
No.
Or will NATO stop it? And I think the answer is no.
NATO can stop it. The question is anyone going to do anything about it? NATO functionally has been stopping that since literally the Cyprus incidents, or the Cyprus War. The long and the short here is that there's no one now in charge of NATO, or at least the Americans are pretty much telling everybody we don't like NATO, we don't care about NATO, which means NATO is effectively defunct. I'm just going to wrap this up here. Turkey is basically being held back by NATO, but that won't last much longer. I have been Tiberius D with Geopolitics with Tiberius D. I don't know why the hell I need to pronounce that over again. This program has been brought to you by our patron team. That is Andrew Wagner, the West Dude, and Ladybug. We appreciate their patronage, and we'll catch you all on the next one.